My name is Kirsten Ware. My pronouns are she, her, they. I am the newest member of Field Day, serving as the VP for Market Development. I also have a former background as an executive director that focused largely on organizations that were volunteer-based. And I get to be your host today. So a little bit about Field Day, just in case you're not aware of who we are. We are a community engagement platform, and we're helping companies and groups that get together and get involved in local nonprofits. This Changemaker channel, as I said, is a series of virtual events. We're having chats with leaders of nonprofits who are on Field Day, who have activities listed and participating with us. And the focus of what we're doing here is to try and dig deeper into the issues in our community and hear from them on the work that they're doing and how it addresses those issues. We're also going to be focusing on calls to action and ways that you can get involved. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Brandi Tuck, who is the Executive Director of Path Home. Brandi, welcome. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Good, good. I think we can kick it off if you'd like to share just a little bit about your own personal journey and interests. How did you become the executive director for Path Home? I know you've been serving for a good while. It's unusual the number of years you've been there.
Yeah, well, my journey starts a long time ago when I was in college at the University of Florida. Go Gators. I was really involved on campus, and one spring break, I found that all of my friends were going on a community service spring break trip, and no one was going to go to the beach with me. So I thought, well, I guess I'm going to have to go on one of these trips because everybody else is too. There were 11 different issue areas that we had to choose from, and you picked which your top one was. And none of them really spoke to me, honestly. There were environment and education and women's rights and HIV and AIDS and homelessness and poverty and all kinds of different issue areas. And so I just kind of reluctantly said, well, I don't want to touch like farm stuff, and I don't want to have to clean up after animals. And I don't, so I'll just pick the homelessness and poverty one. That seemed the least like messy to me, I guess. I don't know. And so I went on this trip when I was in college to Atlanta, Georgia, focused around homelessness and poverty, and it completely changed my life. During that trip, I vowed that I was going to leave college and stay we volunteered at this little shelter that's similar to the program I run today at Path Home, that I was going to drop out of college and stay at this shelter and help these kids and families that were experiencing homelessness. So after a big cry fest, I decided to go back to school, but I said, you know what, I'm going to change everything. And one day I'm going to do something about this situation. And I went back to college and changed all of my volunteering focus to be about homelessness and poverty, and really just kind of inundated myself in that world. Right after college, I moved out here to Portland in 2005 and wanted quickly to find somewhere to volunteer that was in alignment with this new passion that I had. So I started volunteering at the Goose Hollow Family Shelter, downtown Portland, which was near my house where I lived. And I fell in love with it. I was a volunteer for about 2 years. I was volunteering as a kid time host and an overnight host, probably 2 or 3 times a week. And then 2 years into my volunteering in 2007, when I was very young, their executive director left. And I had my dream job in front of me, but I was very young. I was only 24. And I thought, no one will give me this job. No one will make me the executive director of the Goose Hollow Family Shelter. But they did. And so in 2007, I became executive director of this little shelter, the Goose Hollow Family Shelter, downtown Portland, that served 8 families with children at a time. And now it's been 15 and a half years, and I'm still here.
What a beautiful, I love hearing that pathway and how you've unfolded in terms of your career and what led you. Very, very nice. Thank you, Brandi. I also know that Path Home, just a couple months ago, you guys did a rebranding. The name of the organization previously was Portland Homeless Family Solutions. Can you tell us about, the motivation for the change? Like what's different? in terms of where you started as a nonprofit then and where you're at now, and how that validates and supports the change in the name.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started in 2007, we were a very, very small organization. We had a staff of only 4 part-time people, including me. We had a budget of $78,000 total for the year. We were serving 8 families with children during the winter months of the year in a shelter. So we served between about November and the end of March or April. And that first year that I was here in 2007, we served 60 total families. And for 15 years, that first year that I started as well, we created the nonprofit Portland Homeless Family Solutions. Goose Hollow wasn't a nonprofit when I started working there. It was fiscally sponsored by another nonprofit. So we created the nonprofit to take over operating Goose Hollow in 2007. And so we created to be Portland Homeless Family Solutions. That's what we wanted to do, is help families with children that had no homes and help them find solutions to get back into housing. And so for 15 years, that name served us really well, Portland Homeless Family Solutions, but there were some challenges associated with that name. First, over the years, as we evolved as an organization, we stopped only serving families that were experiencing homelessness. We added in some homeless prevention programs and some more upstream programs like a cash guarantee program that we'll talk about. And so that word homeless family didn't really describe us anymore. And honestly, a lot of landlords, when we would help families try to move into homes, when we would say that we were from Portland Homeless Family Solutions, they would immediately start discriminating against the families we were working with. So we really wanted that name, that word out of our name. We don't just serve families in Portland. We serve families throughout the metro region, sometimes as far as Scappoose or St. Helens or Hood River. So we wanted to be able to more accurately represent the geography where we worked. And honestly, Portland Homeless Family Solutions, or PHFS, just isn't that easy to say or remember. So we worked with an amazing organization called Weinstein PR to help us find a new name. And we worked with a whole bunch of our whole staff and our board and a whole bunch of volunteers. About 350 folks were involved in our process to rename Portland Homeless Family Solutions. And we came up with Path Home that really represents who we are today. And so today, as an organization, Path Home has 55 staff. Our annual operating budget's about $4.5 million a year. We have programs that range all the way from crisis to stability for families. And last year we served over 400 families. And so today our mission at Path Home is to empower families with children to get back into housing and stay there. And so while our name may be smaller, we know that our work is bigger than ever, because we have a homeless crisis where there are so many people with families with children sleeping outside that we need to help. And so we help about 400 families a year. Last year it was over 1,300 people. And we have a few different programs. We have, like I said, programs that range from crisis to stability. We have our family shelter. We also have an outreach program where we go out to the community to find people that are outside, find families with children who are sleeping in their cars or tents or on the side of the road, and we bring them into our shelter. We have space for 17 families with children at a time. We have all the comforts of home here. We have private bedrooms for families. And families are able to access an array of common spaces like a kitchen and dining, living room, library. We have a computer lab, a vegetable garden, a playground, a basketball court, all kinds of places for families to be able to be themselves. 58% of the people who come to our shelter program are kids, and half of those kids are under 5. While their parents are here, 2/3 of the parents are working while they stay in shelter. For all the families that are in shelter, plus lots more, we have a program called Rapid Rehousing, where we help families move from homelessness back into permanent housing. We helped last year over 330 families move from homelessness into housing. We provide long-term rent assistance, and we provide case management to families to help them keep their housing long-term. As a result of our services, 88% of families keep their housing and don't have to experience homelessness again. We have a long-term housing stability program, a housing retention program, where we're working with families on creating more income. We're helping them connect to services in the community, find more affordable housing, and really get to the point where they can keep their housing long-term. We have a homeless prevention program. We had a few years ago, in 2017, we had families calling us to get on our shelter wait list saying, in a couple of days, I'm going to be losing my home. Can I get on the wait list for shelter? And we said, there's got to be something we can do to help these families who are about to lose housing. So we started our homeless prevention program. This year so far, we've helped 67 families prevent their homelessness. It's over 200 kids and parents. This is one of our fastest growing programs, and we're on track this next year to serve over 100 families to help them prevent homelessness. It not only prevents the crisis and the trauma that families and especially kids go through when they lose their housing, it's also the most cost effective. On average, we spend about $10,000 to help rehouse a family, compared to only about $3,000 to prevent homelessness before it starts. And finally, our last program is our basic income guarantee program. It's a cash transfer pilot project where we are following worldwide data that shows the fastest and most efficient way to end poverty for people is by giving them cash and allowing them to manage their own households. So this is based off of work that's done in Stockton, California, as well as many places around the country and around the world. And we're giving $575 cash assistance to families once a month for 2 years. We're tracking outcomes like housing security, debt level, income level, but we're also tracking things like the amount of time the family spends together, their overall sense of wellness, and their sense of joy together as a family. And what we're finding already is that this program is producing incredible results. One mom said she didn't know how stressed she was about money every single second of every single day until all of a sudden she wasn't. And then she was making dinner for her kids and going to the soccer games. And so this is the kind of programs that we're working with families.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Exponential growth. I can't believe it. It is amazing what you all have done. Brandi, your team is incredible. Just a comment too, I want to make about Path Home, and really, I love the name change and how it really embraces your vision, and it really does get beyond temporary shelter. You're talking about long-term solutions and helping people to, live with supports and have success. And that retention rate, 88%. Oh my goodness. I'm just
Thank you.
so impressed. And I love the fact that, Path Home is focusing on families and children too. Of course, sort of segueing into the next question for you, obviously communities nationwide, with Portland, of course, included, folks are talking about homelessness, the crisis, what can we do about it? Can you share with us, you've outlined all these incredible programs that provide stability and that pathway to home. Why do we have the problem? What are the causes? What are the conditions that bring us, that have sort of culminated at this point in history, and at this time in our city, specifically to cause this? So please share with us.
Yeah, so great question. And homelessness, of course, is, it's varied and it's complex and there's all kinds of things going on. But basically, we've had homelessness in this country since the day our country was founded. We came over and didn't have an infrastructure of housing or jobs, or, we were taking land from Native Americans first, and we didn't have an infrastructure upon that land that we took. And so from the very first days of colonial America, that was the first time that word homeless was ever used, was colonial America back in the 1700s. Up through the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution, we continued to have rampant homelessness. The government's response was that they were not going to get involved, that homelessness and charity and poverty were things that wealthy philanthropists could donate money to nonprofits to help, but really it wasn't the government's job to get involved. until the 1930s, when the Great Depression wiped out more wealth than we'd ever seen in the country. And there were more families, individual, regular folks outside without housing. So the government enacted the New Deal. One of the components of the New Deal was to create the Federal Housing Authority. And we started funding that agency at $80 billion a year to create and maintain housing all over the country where folks could live who had low incomes. And it worked. Between the 40s and the 80s, with investing $80 billion a year to build and maintain this infrastructure of housing, homelessness basically went away for 40 years until the 1980s, when we defunded the Federal Housing Administration from $80 billion a year down to $20 billion a year. And the result was this national infrastructure of housing fell into really bad disrepair and it was torn down. New construction stopped, and so we have now a shortage of housing for people who make very low incomes. Now, this doesn't mean we have a shortage of housing overall. We actually have enough housing. We don't have enough housing that's affordable to pay people that make low or no income. And so in the late 80s and 90s, as a result of this defunding of our housing infrastructure, we started experiencing homelessness again. That's when the Goose Hollow Family Shelter was founded, was 1994, when families with children were first started being seen downtown Portland and in Forest Park. And so the government, again in the 90s, decided they would respond. And their response this time was not to build up a federal housing infrastructure, but instead it was to create an emergency system where shelters, street outreach programs, and clinics were set up to deal with all the people that were living on the streets. And so that has been our situation ever since. We've continued to see more and more people live on the streets because we have not invested in housing. In 2015 was the first time in Portland that we used that word, homeless state of emergency, that we started calling it a crisis. And since then, it sure feels like things have only gotten worse, as you can look around our city and see so many more people living outside. And so this is what we see and we think is a crisis, all these people living outside, and that's true. And it's a little more nuanced than that. There are so many different faces of homelessness. So many people experience homelessness. At Path Home, we serve families with children. As I said earlier, half those kids are under 5. Their Oregon Department of Education reports there are about 3,000 students every year that experience homelessness in Multnomah County alone. And I'll argue that there's probably 3,000 kids that are not yet in school that are experiencing homelessness every year in Multnomah County, plus all their parents. We have seniors who live on a fixed income and can no longer afford housing in their retirement ages. We have domestic violence system survivors who are fleeing domestic violence situations and have to leave their home just so that they can save their lives. And so I share this with you because it's important that we recognize that while we have a crisis of people camping all over our city that we can visibly see, there are just as many people, if not more, who we don't see. And these are the unseen homeless, the families, the seniors, the vets, the survivors, and people with disabilities who hide from plain sight out of fear for their safety. And so let's talk about the data. What does the data say about how many people experience homelessness? We rely on a source called the One Night Street and Shelter Count. We know that between 2009 and 2022, unsheltered homelessness increased by 77%. And that makes sense when we look around our community and we see how many people are outside. We also know that between 2017 and 19, we lost some services in our communities. We closed shelters and transitional housing programs during those years. We've increased the number of shelter beds that we have these days since the pandemic, but it still is not nearly enough for the amount of people that are outside. But here's the thing too. In the midst of more and more people being outside and less shelter beds, we've also been housing a lot of people. In 2020, we housed over 5,000 people as a community. And 18 months later, 83% of those folks were still housed. So what's going on here? If we're housing people and they're staying housed, why do we still have so many people who are experiencing homelessness? What's really going on here? What we do know is that we have gotten really good at solving homelessness at the individual level, but we haven't been looking at homelessness at the systemic or the societal level. We have created all kinds of programs that help families exit homelessness, but it's not because our programs aren't working. It's because we just don't have enough of this programs to scale up to help the number of people that are experiencing homelessness. And one of the problems is we don't always know, we don't have good data about how many people are experiencing homelessness. And we use these words called inflow and outflow. And I don't like these words because they help make you forget that you're talking about people. But basically, inflow is the number of people that fall into homelessness, and outflow is the number of people that move out of homelessness and back into housing. And right now, inflow far outpaces outflow. More people are falling into homelessness every day, and we don't have the scale of the solutions that we need. A lot of times we focus on outputs rather than outcomes. Outcomes are the differences made by outputs. Outputs are things like the number of shelter beds, the number of people sheltered, the number of folks who visit the day center, and they're great services that we're providing. But to end homelessness, we need to be looking at outcomes. How many people are ending homelessness for good and staying housed? How many people are increasing the amount of income that they make so that they can pay for their rent long term? We really need to be focusing on these outcomes rather than just outputs. And we need to solve homelessness systemically. We're not solving homelessness at the systemic level. And there's been a new book that's come out called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And what it basically says is it went through all of these different causes of homelessness to see what are the root causes? Is it drug abuse? Is it mental illness? Is it poverty? What's causing homelessness in our community? And so this book goes through all these different root causes, and it compares the rates of homelessness in these places to see if they're correlated. And what we find is when you look at things like poverty, Portland and Seattle are actually relatively low poverty communities. Detroit is the most impoverished. They have high poverty in Detroit. So you would assume Portland and Seattle would have low homelessness and Detroit to have high homelessness, right? But it's the opposite. Portland and Seattle, low poverty places, have high homelessness, and Detroit has very little homelessness. So there wasn't a correlation with poverty. They looked at drug abuse. They went to West Virginia, the center of the opioid drug crisis. And if you would correlate those two things, drug abuse and homelessness, you would think that West Virginia would have a lot of homelessness, but they don't. And so they found that the only thing that correlates with high rates of homelessness is the housing rental market. And in places where the rental market is tight and there are low vacancy rates, there's high homelessness. And in areas where the vacancy rate is high and there are lots of available apartments, there's very little homelessness. And so it really comes down to understanding the crisis is that how homelessness is a housing issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're talking about a few things that you said when you were talking about inflow and outflow, reminding us that these are people, that we are people, and it just seems like it seems like a human, sort of the human condition of trying to rationalize what it is you're seeing, and also at the same time, unfortunately, of the aversion, not engaging with people who do not have homes, who are houseless. And I know that Path Home has a special approach in terms of trauma-informed care, as well as trauma-informed design, that is very intentional. It builds dignity, restores power to the individual, and promotes autonomy. And so I know that you all pair that with all of your work. I would love to hear you share more about what trauma-informed care and design are, and how it transforms shelters and the path back to housing.
Sure, one of my favorite topics. So we're going to do a little bit of brain science education here. Maybe you know this, but when anyone's brain, any human's brain experiences any stress, our brains release chemicals to help us get through that stress. And when it's positive stress, like a presentation at work or starting a new job or getting married or moving, things that can be very stressful, our brain releases chemicals that help us get through that stress. And those positive stress chemicals do things like promote emotional regulation, enhance critical thinking and logical thought. And you've felt that feeling when you're really nervous about something and you get up there and you just nail that presentation. It's because you had a bunch of chemicals in your brain helping you do that. And then there's another kind of stress, distress, negative stress. Our brain releases different chemicals when we encounter negative stress. And these chemicals put you into your fight, flight, or freeze survival mode. It turns off the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's responsible for all of our human things that we do, our thinking, our speech and language, our logic. It turns that off. So you only have fight, flight, or freeze available to you. You are in survival mode. So negative stress is helpful maybe when a lion is running at you in the wild, or your kid is trapped under a car. Your brain releases these momentarily life-saving chemicals that allow you to run away from that lion or lift the car off the kid. And that's great. But the thing is, these chemicals are also released during stressful things like homelessness, domestic violence, neglect, and abuse. And when it stops being this momentarily life-saving response, and it happens for days, weeks, months, or years, it turns into a trauma. It starts to rewire the brain into thinking that there is always a dangerous lion about to run at you and kill you. So your brain stops critically thinking, stops being able to tell time, stops being able to be human, and it can only focus on, where's this lion coming from? And what do I need to do to protect myself? So when people come to us at Path Home, trauma-informed care is knowing that this is happening in the brain and creating conditions that help the brain calm down out of distress mode and get back into that positive stress that brings about attention and emotional regulation and all of those positive things. And so when you are, so some of the characteristics of trauma-informed care, it's about safety, all kinds of safety, physical, emotional, psychological, creating conditions where people can really let their guard down and feel that they are welcome and that they are safe and no harm or trauma will come to them. It's about giving people a sense of power and control, giving people true choice and autonomy, being transparent and predictable and consistent in relationship space. And so this is this beautiful structure of trauma-informed care that we have done for a long while programmatically with families. And then trauma-informed design and architecture is kind of a subset of trauma-informed care that brings these principles into the built environment, the walls and the buildings and the architecture of a place. And so we have a trauma-informed building here at Path Home. And what that means is that there is the sense of when you come in, your brain chemistry starts to change and you go from a stressful distress reaction to one where you can get back into your logical thinking mode and out of survival mode. Some of the features, it's a really big connection to nature. So there's natural plants, both indoors and outdoors. Lots of natural light, natural materials like stone and wood. There are flexible spaces that can be used in many different ways. It's about creating emotional and physical safety and predictability through things like all of our doors, our glass doors, so you can see through them and predict and know what's on the other side of them. It's about really intentional signage and wayfinding. The color palette is that of the ocean. And something that's really interesting is it's about circles and rounded edges and rounded forms, because that neurobiologically sparks joy in the brain. And so we have some photos, I think, of our Family Village campus where you can see the trauma-informed design in action. This is our shelter. This is our shelter for 17 families where they come. When families enter into our programs, they make responses like, wow, this makes me feel like you care about me. This makes me feel like I can be calm and peaceful. And it really does help change the situation for families so that they can get into that logical thinking part of their brain, which allows them to do things like understand shelter guidelines, make appointments on time, be able to tell time, and then connect logically that this is the time that you need to show up, about being able to get a job and keep it or learn at school. This is the kind of environment that we're setting up for folks.
That is so wonderful. I can see the universal benefits, knowing that, just having peaceful environment altogether. But that is incredible. And the thoughtfulness that you put into all of your programs, and how you integrate that is just really, really special. Brandi, thank you for sharing that. It was great hearing about the growth in your budget. I know that Path Home has been hugely supported by the community over the years, not just with resources, financial resources, but also through the role of volunteerism. I know that I think you said it started out as a volunteer organization that was born out of volunteerism. Would love to hear about that. Also want to just do a time check and say it is just about 12:34. So that'll leave us 10 minutes for the rest of our conversation today, but we want to save a little bit of time for some Q&A, which we have at the end of this of your deck. So let's go into that question around the importance of community support and the role of volunteers with Path Home.
Yeah, so like you said, we were founded as a volunteer-run agency. We were completely volunteer for the first few years. I started as a volunteer. We have a huge legacy of having volunteers involved in our programs, and today is no different. We have all kinds of volunteer opportunities for individuals, for families, for work teams, corporations. We have all kinds of different opportunities for folks. Some of our opportunities are coming, they're all here at Family Village campus, where we have opportunities for folks to come and help with our grounds crew. We have a beautiful landscaped facility where folks can come and do weeding and gardening. We have a kid club volunteer role where folks can come and do activities and games and crafts with the kids. We have a lot around meals. We have meal providers. Folks make food and serve it to the families. We have a kitchen helper who comes in and serves and prepares and then helps clean up. We also have a turnover team that helps refresh the bedrooms when a family moves out into housing. Turnover team comes in, cleans everything, puts on new sheets, puts out a new coffee pot and a welcome kit and things like that. So we have over 300 volunteers a year that donate thousands of hours of service. It's over like 6 staff positions that we save by having such volunteer support. And we would really love to have any of you, all of you, join us here at Family Village to get to know our programs and our families.
Excellent. Yeah, sign me up. I just want to thank you, Brandi, so much. You just shared all of this great information with us today. I'm inspired. I'm ready to take some action. Tell us how everyone else here can get involved with Path Home. Of course, Field Day the engagement platform is focused primarily on companies and teams within companies, but I know you have a number of other ways that folks can get involved.
Yeah, we have all of our volunteer roles. We do lots and lots of donation collections every year for things like tissues and medicines and socks and underwear. So there's all kinds of donations. And you can also be part of the larger community's solution to homelessness. You can educate your friends and your coworkers and your neighbors and your community about what we've talked about today. Read that book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, and really learn about the structural causes of homelessness. And then advocate to elected officials, to other folks in powerful positions, to have them spend money on the solutions that prioritize housing, that end homelessness for good. You can be a YIMBY and say yes in my backyard when it comes to things like siting shelters or affordable housing complexes. And anytime you're talking with someone about a plan to end homelessness, there's 3 questions that you can ask. How much housing will this plan create? How quickly will people be moved into that housing? And what services will be available to the folks in that housing and how quickly? That is how we end homelessness. is by helping folks move from not having a home to having a home.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm going to move over to some of these questions from the chat. The first one that came out was a question about the difference in semantics. I'm reading directly off the chat, between houselessness and homelessness.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it's semantics, right? I think we used homelessness for a long time. People now are using houselessness. They say it's, there's a connection to home can be everywhere. I don't agree. I think a home has to have walls and electricity and climate control, or like at least insulation and running water. So for me, it's really a semantics if you use homelessness or houselessness. What's the most important for me is that you use people first language. So they're not houseless people. They're not homeless people. They're people experiencing houselessness. They're people experiencing homelessness, people without homes, that we put people first. And we remember that these are folks that don't have housing. And whether you use homelessness or houselessness, it really is just semantics.
Thank you. And the next question was first a compliment from one of our attendees, thanking you for the great work and your leadership, innovation to solutions that the team is implementing. He's got a few questions here. With so many families with school-age children, are you able to support academically, the academic supports?
Yes, that's a great question. And this is why we feel so passionately about families. We're one of the only organizations in Portland that focuses exclusively on families. And so we really take the whole family into account. We work very closely with the McKinney-Vento advocates. There's a whole federal piece of legislation that was passed in the 90s when homelessness came back in the 90s. This piece of legislation that was passed to protect kids who experience homelessness. So we work very closely with the Title X McKinney-Vento liaisons. That's a very fancy word for them. They're basically just homelessness liaisons who are so attentive to the kids who are experiencing shelter. We work super close. I mean, even to the point where I had a homeless advocate call me a couple weeks ago saying, hey, I'm going to stop by this evening. I said, oh, why are you stopping by? She said, well, because I noticed so-and-so didn't have a coat at school. So I went and got him a coat, and I'm going to drop a coat off at the shelter tonight. I mean, they're that connected to us. They are so intimate. When we shut down for COVID, we worked with every single school district to make sure that the kids had their Chromebooks and that they had a workspace and they had school supplies and that they were getting lunch and all of that. So we work really closely to ensure that the kids are in school, that they have the supports they need. If it's not provided by the homeless liaison, then the family's case manager or retention specialist can provide those services. And it's really critical for us. We know that all these kiddos are experiencing adverse childhood experiences here by being here. So it's really important to us to create conditions and give opportunities so that kids can be not so impacted by those adverse childhood experiences and have connections to safe schools and adults and people that can support them.
It's what an incredible network of partners in this effort. It just is amazing. Part two of his question was, their question was, what kind of best practices are you seeing with families where primary language is not English and LGBTQ plus families?
Yeah, so this is something that we're really serious about here at Path Home. We want to be a really inclusive, anti-racist, anti-oppressive organization. So we have spent a long time making sure that we have a staff that's culturally competent and diverse enough to support families. So we have many different, I think there's like 6 or 7 fluently Spanish speaking staff. We have Vietnamese on staff. We have Chukis on staff. We have all kinds of languages that we try to have in-house. If we don't have a person on staff who is a fluent translator, we work with 2 different translation services to help get a translator on the phone or in person to be able to do all that work. 70% of the families that we work with identify as Black, Brown, Indigenous, or other people of color, and a good percentage of them are immigrants. So they don't have English as a first language. And it's really, we try to be really intentional to provide those supports to folks. Like even having our shelter handbook is translated into Chukis. Chuk is a island in Micronesia where there's a lot of immigrants that come to the Pacific Northwest. And so really going out of our way to make our programs accessible. And then the same thing for LGBTQ+. 51% of our staff are Black, Brown, Indigenous, or other people of color, and 47% are LGBTQ+IA. So again, it's just having access to people who have similar lived experience to you, that you can help them navigate systems in a really informed way.
Fantastic. I want to try and catch the last two questions before we close out today. Can you share some information about upcoming projects? And I'm going to go ahead and read the other. A big thank you for your work. Question: what, if any, emotional wellness services do you provide to families in your facility?
Yeah, and those two questions really go hand in hand. So we have a vision here that our Family Village campus can be a one-stop shop for families experiencing homelessness and housing instability, where they have all the tools, the resources, and the relationships that they need to end homelessness for good. And so we have, right now, we own about a little over an acre of land out in Lentz neighborhood. That's where I am right now. We have this large 16,000 square foot building that we are hosting as our shelter. And we have some vacant land on our campus as well. So we're already in pre-development. We're going to start our capital campaign in 2023 to build out that vacant land. And we're going to create two different buildings. One building will be 23 units of permanent housing, as well as some community spaces and resident services, community rooms, and a commercial kitchen and things like that. And then the other building will be our services building, where we are going to have on-site wraparound services to help families end homelessness. Right now, we try to access these wraparound services from systems all over the community. Families have to call multiple numbers. With our help, we have to, with families, call multiple numbers, get on multiple wait lists, travel all over the metro area just to get an appointment for mental health. So we want to centralize that, have everything here, and have a multi-services center with services for mental health and recovery. We want to have on-site clinicians. We have had therapists over the years that come here that provide drop-in therapy for families. And we really want to have a mental health counseling center where there is always a counselor available if a family needs it. We want a domestic violence advocacy center, an employment training center, and a placement center, and then a child care center. And so we want to have all of those services here for the families that live here, but also for the families that we help move all over the Portland metro area. They can come back and continue to experience this beautiful, healing, safe community while they receive their necessary services.
Excellent. I know there are more questions and we've gone ahead and written those down. We're going to have to close out our conversation today a little on time, hopefully. So I know some folks need to plan. We just try to stick with the plan on that one, but we will follow up with some answers. We'll make sure and get those questions answered for you. I'd like us to go to the call to action page. Just a reminder on how you can take action with Path Home, sharing the recording tomorrow and the slides tomorrow. That'll come out to you directly via email, along with those follow-up answers to questions. I'd also like to invite all of you, if you're interested, to our next installment of Changemaker channel in early 2023, where we'll be chatting with Mitchell Esmoda, the executive director of our streets. So be sure to sign up for those updates on heyfieldday.com so you can get notified when that sign up link is out. And I do hope you'll join us. I want to thank you, Brandi, and all of you for participating today. Special shout out to Catalin for her amazing coordination and supporting us in making this happen.
Thank you all so much.
Yes.
I really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate your great questions. And I always am here for more questions. If you want to reach out, I'm happy to continue.
Excellent. Hope you'll have a great day. Bye-bye.